She had offered multiple times during the wedding planning process to help steer things in the right direction, a phrase that translated in practice to redoing everything Diane had already done. Diane had managed all of this with what she herself called a commitment to the long game. She had not picked fights she couldn't win. She had been polite. She had smiled at the opinions she disagreed with. She had redirected, softened, and absorbed all the things women are trained from birth to do when faced with a particular brand of entitlement that arrives wrapped in family loyalty and good intentions. She was not a pushover. She was strategic. There is a difference, and it matters for this story. When Diane and Marcus moved into their apartment, a two-bedroom on the third floor of a building with a doorman, a reasonable commute, and a kitchen that Diane had immediately recognized as the kitchen she wanted to cook in for the next 5 years, Diane had been very deliberate about one thing: the keys. She and Marcus each had one. The building manager had one. That was the policy, the agreement, the boundary she had stated clearly and without apology when they moved in. Our home is our space. I love your mother. She is welcome any time she's invited. But she does not have a key. No one does. This is our home. Marcus had agreed, easily and without argument, because Marcus was, as previously established, a good man who understood reasonable things. What neither of them had fully accounted for was how Patricia might feel about reasonable things. She had offered multiple times during the wedding planning process to help steer things in the right direction, a phrase that translated in practice to redoing everything Diane had already done. Diane had managed all of this with what she herself called a commitment to the long game. She had not picked fights she couldn't win. She had been polite. She had smiled at the opinions she disagreed with. She had redirected, softened, and absorbed all the things women are trained from birth to do when faced with a particular brand of entitlement that arrives wrapped in family loyalty and good intentions. She was not a pushover. She was strategic. There is a difference, and it matters for this story. When Diane and Marcus moved into their apartment, a two-bedroom on the third floor of a building with a doorman, a reasonable commute, and a kitchen that Diane had immediately recognized as the kitchen she wanted to cook in for the next 5 years, Diane had been very deliberate about one thing: the keys. She and Marcus each had one. The building manager had one. That was the policy, the agreement, the boundary she had stated clearly and without apology when they moved in. Our home is our space. I love your mother. She is welcome any time she's invited. But she does not have a key. No one does. This is our home. Marcus had agreed, easily and without argument, because Marcus was, as previously established, a good man who understood reasonable things. What neither of them had fully accounted for was how Patricia might feel about reasonable things. To understand the key incident, you need to understand that it did not arrive in a vacuum. It was the latest and most egregious in a series of boundary violations that had been accumulating since the week after the wedding. There was the time Patricia had come to visit while Diane was at work and had, in the 2 hours before Diane got home, rearranged the kitchen cabinets. Not drastically. Just enough that everything Diane reached for was in a different place. When Diane mentioned it gently, Patricia said she had just been trying to help organize things more efficiently. When Diane said she had already organized them the way she liked, Patricia said that was fine, but had Diane considered that the glasses were easier to reach if they were on the left? Diane had. They were on the right. That was where Diane wanted them. There was the time Patricia had asked, on 3 separate occasions in 1 month, whether Diane and Marcus had considered moving to a bigger apartment, more room for when the grandchildren come, she said, in the particular tone of someone announcing a plan rather than raising a suggestion. There was the Sunday afternoon when Diane and Marcus had come home from brunch to find Patricia in the lobby. Not upstairs, not inside, just in the lobby, waiting because she had been in the neighborhood and thought she'd stop by. She had been waiting, the doorman estimated, for about 45 minutes. She had brought a cake. Each of these incidents, taken alone, could be explained away. Blamed on cultural difference, on a mother's love, on the specific and widely documented difficulty of a woman whose entire identity has reorganized itself around her only child now having to share the child with someone else. Diane understood all of these explanations. She had thought through all of them. She had extended every reasonable benefit of every reasonable doubt that could be extended. And then came the Tuesday. It was an ordinary Tuesday in late autumn. Diane had worked a full day. She was a project manager at a mid-sized architecture firm, which meant her days were long and her brain was usually running 3 parallel tracks at once by the time she closed her laptop. She had commuted home, picked up groceries from the shop on the corner, and taken the elevator to the 3rd floor. She had put her key in the lock. And she had noticed, immediately, that the door was not fully latched. The way it sometimes wasn't when someone had just closed it without quite pulling it all the way shut. She had pushed it open. The lights were on. Something was on the stove. And Patricia was standing in the kitchen in Diane's home, on a Tuesday afternoon when she had not been invited, had not called ahead, and had no key, or so Diane had believed until that exact moment, to let herself in. "Oh, you're home. Perfect timing. I'm making soup. Marcus mentioned you both had a busy week, so I thought I'd come cook something. I've been here about an hour. You're out of bay leaves, by the way, I made a note." Diane put her grocery bags down on the floor of the entryway. She stood very still for a moment that she later described as the longest 4 seconds of my adult life. And then she said, in the calm and measured tone of someone who is holding something very large and very heavy very carefully, "Patricia, how did you get in?" Patricia turned from the stove with the expression of a woman who had fully anticipated this question and had an answer ready. She reached into the front pocket of her cardigan and produced, with the unhurried confidence of someone revealing something they expect to be received as good news, a key. A key that was unmistakably a copy of the key on Diane's keychain. Same shape. Same color. Same brand. I had one made a few weeks ago. Marcus's spare. He'd left it at my house when you came for dinner in September. I thought it would just be easier for everyone if I had one. You know, for emergencies. She had taken her son's key. She had copied it. And she had let herself into their home. Without asking. Without telling. Without a single conversation. Diane looked at the key in Patricia's hand for what felt like a long time. Then she looked at the soup on the stove. Then she looked at the grocery bags on the floor. Then she looked back at Patricia. And she said, "And I want you to appreciate the extraordinary composure required for this response in this moment. Thank you for telling me. Could you give me the key, please? And I think we need to have a conversation when Marcus gets home." Patricia blinked. She had expected, Diane suspected, one of two things, gratitude or an explosion. The quiet, polite, completely unreadable calm that she got instead seemed to throw her entirely. She handed over the key. Diane put it in her pocket. She picked up her grocery bags. She walked to the bedroom, closed the door, and called Marcus. This, I want to pause and say, is the moment in stories like this one where everything pivots. Not on what the mother-in-law did, she had already done it, but on what the husband does next. Because there is a version of this story where Marcus hears what happened, sighs, and says something like, "You know how she is, or she means well, or can we just let this one go?" There is a version where Diane is left alone with this, where the violation is minimized, where she is made to feel that her anger is the problem rather than the action that caused it. That version of this story is more common than any of us would like to admit. And it is not this story. Marcus picked up on the second ring. Diane told him, in 4 sentences, exactly what had happened. What his mother had done. What she had said. And what Diane had found when she walked into her own home. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She made a copy of my key without telling me?" Diane confirmed. "Yes. Okay. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. Don't eat the soup. I'll pick something up on the way." He arrived home 37 minutes later carrying Thai food, with a particular expression of a man who has spent a commute building himself up to a very specific conversation. He walked in, put the food on the counter, nodded once at his mother, and said, "Mom, can we sit down?" What followed was a conversation that Diane described in her Reddit post as the single most important 20 minutes of my marriage so far. Not because it was dramatic. Not because anyone raised their voice. But because Marcus did something that she had hoped he would do and had been quietly afraid he might not. He was clear. He told his mother that taking his key without asking was not acceptable. That copying it without telling either of them was not acceptable. That entering their home without an invitation was not acceptable. That entering their home without an invitation was not acceptable. That he loved her, that he was glad she had wanted to help, and that none of that changed what he was saying. He spoke carefully and without cruelty, but he did not leave any room for reinterpretation. He did not soften it into a suggestion. He stated it as a fact. Patricia's response went through several phases. Surprise, then hurt, then a version of wounded dignity that leaned heavily on phrases like "I only wanted to help," and "I never thought my own son would speak to me like this," and inevitably, "after everything I've done." Marcus listened to all of it. And then he said, "Mom, I hear you. And I love you. But this is Diane's home too. It's our home. And what you did crossed a line that we need you to understand and respect. That's not negotiable." Patricia left shortly afterward. The soup was still on the stove. Marcus turned it off. They ate Thai food on the couch and didn't talk about it very much because they didn't need to. Diane said that night, lying in bed, was the first time she had felt fully safe in her own marriage. Not because the problem was solved. It wasn't. Not yet. But because she now knew with certainty that she was not in this alone. If you thought the conversation ended things, I need you to understand something about Patricia. Patricia was not a woman who accepted the end of conversations. She was a woman who began new ones. In the 2 weeks following the soup incident, Patricia called Marcus 7 times, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the content of those calls. She had, according to Marcus, begun working through a list of grievances about Diane that she had apparently been compiling for some time. The way Diane kept the kitchen. The fact that Diane had once cut a holiday visit short because she had a work deadline. The general feeling that Patricia had, which she articulated with remarkable specificity, that Diane had never really welcomed her into the family. She also called Marcus's aunt. And his cousin. And a family friend named Beverly who had known Marcus since childhood and who, Diane suspects, Patricia had been cultivating as a sympathetic audience for exactly this kind of moment. The extended network was activated. The narrative was being managed. Patricia was, in the language of people who have studied this kind of behavior, doing what people do when a boundary makes them feel out of control. She was trying to regain control through the court of family opinion. Diane knew this was happening. Marcus kept her informed, carefully and honestly, in the way that a man does when he has decided that his marriage comes first and his mother's management of the story comes second. And while Patricia was making calls and managing narratives, Diane was doing something else entirely. On the morning after the soup incident, before Marcus had even woken up, before breakfast, before the full weight of the previous evening had fully settled, Diane had done 2 things. First, she had sent an email to their building manager requesting that all locks on their unit be changed within the week, citing a security concern. The building manager had complied. New locks were installed on a Thursday. New keys were cut. 2 of them. 1 for Diane. 1 for Marcus. Second, she had done something that, when she revealed it in her Reddit update 3 weeks later, caused the comment section to erupt with a reaction that can only be described as collective, thunderous approval. She had checked the building's visitor log. Their building had a front desk. The doorman kept a visitor log, a simple handwritten record of guests who came through the lobby. It was not a formal security system. It was just a notebook. But it was a notebook that covered the past 8 months. Diane had asked, politely and with a plausible reason about a missing package, to take a quick look. Patricia's name appeared in the log 19 times over the past 8 months. Most of those visits had been on weekdays. Most of them had been during the hours when both Diane and Marcus were at work. 19 times. And Diane had known about 4 of them. She had not been visiting occasionally. She had been visiting routinely. 4 months. Alone. In their home. While they were at work. Diane photographed the relevant pages of the log. She went upstairs. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table Patricia had sat at with her tea, and she waited for Marcus to wake up. When he did, she showed him the photos. Marcus sat with them for a long time. Diane said he went through several visible emotions without saying anything. Then he put the phone down, looked at her, and said, "I need to call her. And this time the conversation is going to be different. I need you to stay right here." Because what happened after that phone call, and what Patricia did, and what Diane's response was, is the reason this story has been shared over 400,000 times. And I mean what I say when I tell you, the ending is not what anyone expected. Including Patricia. Marcus called Patricia that Saturday morning. He asked her to come over. He did not tell her why. She arrived, Diane noted, in a detail that says everything, with another cake. The 3 of them sat in the living room. Marcus placed Diane's phone on the coffee table, open to the photographs of the visitor log. He pushed it toward his mother and said, Mom, I need you to look at these and tell me what I'm seeing. Patricia looked at the photographs. For a long moment, her face did nothing. Then it moved through a sequence of expressions: recognition, recalibration, and finally the particular expression of someone deciding how to reframe something that has just been made very difficult to reframe. She said that she had only been stopping by to check on things, to make sure the plants were watered, to see if they needed anything from the shops. She said it with the confidence of someone presenting a perfectly reasonable explanation. Marcus asked her how she had been getting in. Patricia, and this is the detail that made Diane's hands go cold when she heard it, said that she hadn't needed to use the key every time. That sometimes the doorman had let her up. That he knew her by name. That she had told him she was family. Diane thought about 19 visits. About the plants that had been occasionally moved. About the time she had come home and had the vague, impossible-to-articulate feeling that something in the apartment was slightly different. Not wrong. Just shifted. Like air that had been recently disturbed. She had not been imagining it. Marcus asked his mother, very quietly, whether she understood why this was a problem. Patricia began to answer. And this is where Diane did the thing that she had been quietly, patiently, strategically preparing to do since the morning after the soup incident. She opened her laptop. Because Diane, organized, methodical, patient Diane who believed in the long game, had spent the 2 weeks since the soup incident doing something that she had told no one, including Marcus, that she was doing. She had consulted a lawyer. Not a family lawyer. A property lawyer who specialized in tenant rights and home privacy. She had described the situation. She had provided the visitor log photographs. She had asked what her options were and what the relevant legal frameworks looked like in their state. She had received, in return, a very clear and rather detailed letter explaining exactly what entering someone's private residence without invitation constituted, what the legal definitions of trespass looked like in their jurisdiction, and what remedies were available to the occupants of the property should they choose to pursue them. She turned the laptop around and placed it on the coffee table next to the phone. She looked at Patricia and said, with the same measured, unhurried calm she had used in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, "Patricia, I want you to know that I don't want to use this. I have no desire to make this legal, or formal, or public. What I want, all I have ever wanted, is for our home to be our home. For the three of us to find a way to have a relationship that works for everyone. But I need you to understand that I am not someone who will simply absorb this indefinitely. And I need you to understand that I have options. I'm choosing not to use them today. What I'm asking you to do today is hear what Marcus said last time, and actually believe that we meant it." Patricia looked at the laptop. She looked at the letter. She looked at Diane. And for the first time in 2 years of marriage and 4 years of relationship, in the entire span of time that Diane had known this woman, Patricia had nothing to say. The silence lasted a long time. Then Patricia picked up the cake she had brought, stood up, and said she needed some time to think. She left the apartment. She did not take the cake. Marcus looked at his wife across the coffee table. Diane closed her laptop. They sat with the quiet for a moment. And then Marcus said, very softly, "You consulted a lawyer." Diane said yes. Without telling me. Diane said yes. She said she had wanted to know what her options were before she needed them. That she had hoped she'd never need to use it. And that she still hoped she wouldn't. Marcus was quiet for another moment. Then he looked at her with a specific expression that she had learned, over 6 years, meant that he was experiencing several emotions at once and had decided to lead with the most important one. He said, "That is the most prepared person I have ever met in my life. I married the right woman." They ate the cake for dinner. Diane posted her Reddit update 6 weeks after the Saturday conversation. She had waited because she wanted to see what the aftermath actually looked like before she reported on it. The aftermath looked like this. Patricia called Marcus 3 days after the meeting. She did not apologize, not exactly. What she said was that she had been thinking about the conversation, and that she supposed she understood why Diane might have felt her privacy was not being respected, and that she would try to be more mindful going forward. It was the kind of non-apology that a more impatient person might have rejected. Diane chose to accept it, not because it was sufficient but because she had decided, and this was a decision she had made before the conversation, not in response to it, that what she wanted was a workable relationship going forward, not a perfect acknowledgement of the past. Patricia had not let herself in since. She called before coming. She waited for an invitation. She was, in Diane's words, not transformed, but redirected. Which was all Diane had ever asked for. The doorman was spoken to. He was very apologetic. He had genuinely not understood the situation. New visitor protocols were agreed upon. Diane had brought him a thank you card and a box of biscuits when everything was settled, because she was, at her core, the kind of person who understood that most people are doing their best with the information they have and that kindness costs very little. In her Reddit update, Diane wrote something that I want to read to you carefully, because I think it is the most useful thing in this entire story. I want to be clear about something. I was never angry at Patricia in the way people assume. I was exhausted by her. There's a difference. Anger is loud and hot and it burns itself out. Exhaustion is quiet and cold and it accumulates. What I needed was not for her to suffer any consequences. I genuinely don't want that. What I needed was for her to understand that I was not someone she could simply manage or outlast. That I had resources and patience, and a husband who stood beside me. Once she understood those things, the dynamic changed. Not perfectly, but enough. The lawyer's letter was not a weapon. It was a mirror. I held it up so she could see what the situation looked like from outside her own narrative. That's all it was. And that was enough. Marcus asked me once if I had always planned to use it. I told him the truth. I never wanted to. But I have always believed that the best way to never need a thing is to make sure the other person knows you have it. After that, you rarely do. There is something I keep coming back to in Diane's story, and it is not the key, or the visitor log, or even the lawyer's letter. It is the word she used to describe how she felt in the beginning. Not angry. Exhausted. Because I think that word is the one that most people in boundary violation situations reach for when they're finally honest. The anger gets all the attention, the viral moment, the satisfying confrontation, the righteous fury. But underneath the anger, in the people who are living with this day after day, is the bone-deep tiredness of someone who has been managing another person's emotional reality at the expense of their own for a very long time. Diane's genius, and I mean that genuinely, was that she never let the exhaustion become the decision-maker. She didn't react when she found Patricia in the kitchen. She didn't explode when she saw the visitor log. She didn't use the lawyer's letter as a weapon at the first opportunity. She gave each stage of the situation the response that the situation called for, no more, no less, and she held her position without either escalating or retreating. That is extraordinarily difficult. Most of us are not wired for it. Most of us either go too soft, absorbing violation after violation until we shatter, or too hard, burning every bridge in a single moment of justified rage. Diane found the third path, the narrow, patient, strategically clear path, and she walked it without flinching. And she did not do it alone. That matters too. Marcus stood beside her. Completely, clearly, without hesitation. He did not make her choose between his mother and her sanity. He chose her, and he chose his mother too, in the only way that actually helps someone, by being honest with her about what she needed to change. This story resonated with 400,000 people not because Patricia was uniquely terrible, she wasn't really. She was recognizable. Millions of people have a version of Patricia in their family. What made people share it, cry over it, and save it was Diane. Was the proof that it is possible to hold a line without becoming the villain of the story. That you can be kind and firm at the same time. That being strategic is not the same as being cold. That the long game, played with love and clarity, can actually work. The key is just a key. What Diane protected was something much harder to replace. Her home. Her marriage. Her sense of herself as someone who deserved both. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. Not for watching. For staying. For giving this story the time it deserved. I want to ask you something, and I'm asking it genuinely, not just as a CTA. What would you have done the moment you found her sitting in your kitchen? Would you have kept your cool like Diane, or would you have lost it completely? Tell me honestly in the comments. There is no wrong answer. I genuinely want to know. And if you've had your own version of a Patricia in your life, feel free to share it. The comments section on this channel is a real community and your story matters. If this video made you feel seen or validated, or just delightfully outraged on Diane's behalf, subscribe and hit the bell. We post new stories every week. Stories about boundaries, family, love, and the quiet courage it takes to protect the life you've built. Share this with one person who needs to hear that holding your ground is not the same as starting a war. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your home and yourselves.